Welcome back. Good morning. I hope you are ready for another exciting time of obedience, recipe for life. Let's begin with our memory verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. Day 1, God made light. Day 2, God made sky. Day 3, God made land. Day 4, God made the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, God made fish and birds. Day 6, God made animals and man. Day 7, God rested. We've already learned Genesis 1:1. We've worked on day 1 and 2. God made light. God made sky. Last time we looked at God made land and God made sun, moon, and star. This week we're going to be looking at day 5 and day 6. You'll see we're almost to the end and we still have 4 more weeks after this week. So we will all have lots of time to practice so everyone can get in the prize box. Day 5, God made fish and birds. The motion that we want to add for fish and birds are fish and birds. So remember, we've added just a tiny bit of motion for each day to help us remember what God has made. So, day 5, God made fish and birds. Day 6, God made animals. You can do your favorite animal. You could do a monkey. You could do whatever you want. I like to do an elephant, so I raise my trunk. God made animals and man. Man meaning human beings, people. And that's what we're learning this week. Day 5, God made fish and birds. Day 6, God made animals and man. We're not adding our last one until next week. But let's go ahead and review the first 6 days. Day 1, God made light. Remember, we just blink our eyes because it's so bright. Day 2, God made sky. Deep breath. Day 3, God made land. We just stomp our feet to remind us that there's solid ground underneath us. Day 4, God made the sun, moon, and stars. We just wiggle our fingers to be like the twinkling stars. Day 5, God made fish and birds. Day 6, God made animals and man. Good job. Let's go ahead and practice from the beginning down to after day 6. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. Day 1, God made light. Day 2, God made sky. Day 3, God made land. Stomp the ground. Day 4, God made the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, God made fish and birds. Day 6, God made animals and man. Excellent job. Grab your beanbag. Everyone should have a beanbag from Easter. And we're going to just use our beanbag instead of a ball or ping pong ball. We're just going to go back and forth. If you are fortunate enough to have a brother or sister who is working on the memory verse with you, I would suggest passing it back and forth. If you have anyone watching with you, do it. Otherwise, just do it one hand to the other. All right. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. Day 1, God made light. Day 2, God made sky. Day 3, God made land. Day 4, God made the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, God made fish and birds. Day 6, God made animals and man. Great job. Go ahead and try it a little bit faster and a little bit faster and a little bit faster. So you have the memory verse, Genesis 1:1, and days 1 through 6 in order. Let's go ahead and get started on our lesson. You know that we are working on the unit, Obedience, the Recipe for Life. And we know that the definition of obedience is do what the people in charge say. So your first question on your list of questions is always, What is obedience? The answer is do what the people in charge say. You know about obedience because you obey your mom and dad. You do what your mom and dad say. You know what obedience is because you go to school and you obey your teacher. You do what the teacher says. So, obedience, do what the people in charge say. So far, we have been learning about different people who obey. The first one that we came up with was everyone who loves God should obey. And we found out that when they obeyed, what they could do are good deeds. They needed to obey wholeheartedly with their whole heart. Then we found out that we're not the only ones who obey, but Jesus himself also obeyed. He obeyed Mary and Joseph when he was a young boy, and he obeys God the Father. By obeying God, he chose to do the Father's will. He spoke the Father's words. He did what the Father said. Last week, we looked at 4 more individuals and how they obeyed. The first person was Noah. Noah, the Bible says, kept God's commands. Remember how Noah built the ark? He did it all very precisely. We're going to talk more about that and all the instructions that he had to follow. Abraham obeyed God, and God had told him, I want you to leave your homeland of Haran. I want you to go where I tell you to go. And Abraham, he packed up and off he went. King Hezekiah obeyed God. One of the ways he obeyed was to get rid of all the idols. It also says that he obeyed God by keeping all of his commandments. Peter obeyed God by telling about Jesus, by teaching other people about Jesus. We're going to look at a few more ways, and these are stories that you're familiar with, of things that obeyed God. So far we said everyone who loves him, Jesus. We gave 4 other examples. Look at our next one, wind and waves. That's not a person. I want to remind you about the time that Jesus got into the boat with his disciples. Now, we've had this lesson in class before, and it's a lot of fun to act out together. So if you're in your living room and you want to act it out, you just feel free to do that. So Jesus climbs in the boat with his disciples. They're going to go across the lake. And Jesus is so tired. He always was working so hard, and he was just exhausted. So he went and he laid down in the boat, and he went to sleep. And he was sleeping so peacefully. The boat was rocking back and forth, and Jesus was just so comfortable and having a good rest. Meantime, the disciples are rowing the boat to get across the lake. Well, a storm came up, and so the boat started rocking harder. And the disciples were working harder, and they're watching the wind and the waves now and thinking, oh my goodness, this is quite a storm coming up. But Jesus is still just rocking back and forth, sound asleep. Well, the storm continued to get worse to the point that then the disciples were getting afraid. Hey! The water, it's getting in the boat. What are we going to do? And they're getting really worried because now they're getting wet because the water is splashing in and getting on them and filling up the bottom of the boat. And now they're working super hard because they're getting afraid. But again, Jesus is still sound asleep, just enjoying the nice rest that he's having. Finally, the storm is so bad, and the disciples have no way of combating against it, and now they're terrified that they are going to drown. Jesus, still asleep.
Yeah.
The disciples couldn't take it any longer, and they went, and they grabbed Jesus and said, Jesus, save us, we're going to drown. Jesus isn't asleep anymore. And so he gets up and he says, what's the matter with you? Don't you have any faith? And he stood up and he said, "Stop." And the wind stopped and the waves stopped and there was no more storm. Now the disciples had been afraid before. They thought they were going to drown. Now they were like freaked out again, and they looked at each other and they said, "Who is this?" They're talking about Jesus. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? Who obeyed Jesus in this story? It was the wind and the waves. The wind and the waves obeyed Jesus. How did the wind and the waves obey Jesus? They stopped. They stopped the storm. You have this on your card at home. You have wind and waves, and if you go across, you'll see that it says stop the storm. The wind and waves obeyed. When Jesus said stop, they stopped. We're going to save the why for tonight to the very end because the answer is the same for all three. The next story I want to remind you of, because again, we have had this story before, is a story about rocks. And you'll remember that Jesus was riding into Jerusalem on the donkey's colt. Remember, it had never been ridden before, and he's riding into town, and people are waving branches and coats and throwing them into the road for the donkey to ride over. And as Jesus is passing by, they're cheering and they're saying, "Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And they're so excited, and they're treating Jesus like the king he is. They were excited that Jesus was coming. Some of the religious leaders were not excited, and they got upset, and they said, "You need to make these people be quiet. They should not be doing this." Jesus' answer was really interesting because he said, if these people are quiet, he said, the rocks are going to stand up and start cheering. Do rocks talk? I have never heard a rock talk before. And I don't think you've ever heard a rock talk before. But Jesus said, if the people are not cheering, the rocks are going to stand up and start cheering. Would the rocks obey Jesus? How would they obey? If Jesus told the rocks to stand up and start cheering, they would stand up and start praising God. We'll get to why in just a minute because I want to remind you of one more thing. Now there's not another word under here, and that's because it goes right back up to here. Everyone who loves God and keeps his commands. That's who obeys. But I want to remind you of the story, and it's Jesus at the Last Supper. When he got down on the ground and he started washing the disciples' feet. Now, I have on sandals today, but my feet don't need to be washed right now because I already washed them. And I'll tell you why else they don't need to be washed. I was walking in the house and I was walking on the sidewalk. No dirt. You might get to go barefoot because it's summer. And if you play outside all day in your bare feet, by the end of the day, just look at the bottom of your feet. You'll notice that they are a little dirty from playing out in the dirt. But that's okay because you can wash them. Well, Jesus and his disciples did not have sidewalks to walk on. They did not have paved roads, and so everywhere they went, they were walking in dirt. And they had on sandals, and their feet were getting dirty and dirtier and more dirty. Everywhere they went, their feet were getting dirty. So it was the custom that when you got to where you were going, you would wash the dirt off of your feet. Now this job was not a very fun job, and so they usually had the servant who was the very lowest servant. They would do the washing. But Jesus, who was not the very lowest servant, but was actually the one in charge, He got down on his knees and he washed the disciples' feet. And you'll remember that what he said was, I'm washing your feet as an example. An example means I'm going to do this so you'll know what to do. I'm doing this so you'll do it too. Jesus wanted to teach the disciples to serve, and that's our word over here, serve. So it's everyone who loves God will serve. See, I'm going way down here. Serve each other. Now, we do have sidewalks and paved roads now, so it's the only way that we can serve by washing someone's feet. That is not the only way we can serve, because, quite frankly, people would think you were really weird if you tried to wash their feet. But there are other ways we can serve, and it goes right back to doing good deeds, being a helper, being kind, putting others first. And so we do that. Jesus said we needed to follow his example and serve others. Now, we're finally getting to the why. And I said I was saving it to the end because it went for all of it. Before we get to why, I want you to say the beginning of our memory verse, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is why. Why do the wind and waves have to obey? Because God made the winds and waves. Why would the rocks have to obey? Because God made the rocks. Why should we obey God? Because God made us. All of creation was made by God, and because he made us, we should obey. Let's go ahead and pray. Dear God, you are great. You made everything. You made us. Help us to obey. Amen. Enjoy our cooking class. I hope you enjoyed your Muddy Buddies, and I hope you continue to enjoy cooking through the summer. Bye.